So we have Beth Amos here with us, and she is going to talk a little bit about her writing journey and what's coming up next for her. You can
That's always a mystery, pun intended.
Nice.
Good evening, and glad to see someone here. So I was just talking with Pam a little bit about how I got into writing the Addie Winston series that I write as Annelise Ryan. And it's kind of a unique story, or a unique way that particular series came about. Back in the 90s, I was living in Richmond, Virginia at the time, and I was working as a nurse in hospice, and I was interested kind of in death and dying and people who work with death and dying on a regular basis, and trying to understand if they had any sociological aspects that they might have in common. So that's why I chose this particular study. And I spent time with medical examiners and hospice workers, funeral directors, and homicide police to observe people dealing with, dead people, to see how they refer to someone who's dead. Do they call them by name? Do they call them the body? Or do they, how do they do it? And what's their sociological background? So it was actually a fascinating time. And when I went to the medical examiner's office, I actually went and did the autopsy with Dr. Marcella Fierro, who is the medical examiner that was sort of the impetus for Patricia Cornwell's Kay Scarpetta character. Although Marcella Fierro couldn't look any more different than the Kay Scarpetta character, the way she's described. They're like exact opposites. But Marcella Fierro is a brilliant woman, and what a character. Anyway, I waited and waited and waited for an autopsy to come in. I was very worried about how I was going to be able to do with an autopsy. I was afraid that if we got something kind of gross or something that smelled a little, that I might get sick or I might pass out, and that I would have embarrassed myself. And so when they finally got an autopsy coming in, they reported that it was going to be a 17-year-old boy who had fallen into the river 3 months before and drowned. And the body had just surfaced because he fell in during the winter time, and the weather had just gotten warm enough for the body to come up. So I was very nervous, thinking, oh, geez, this is going to smell bad. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to do something awful and embarrass myself. And so I stood there, and I remember when they cut the body open, there's a smell to the inside of a body, kind of a visceral smell. If you ever work in surgery, you'll notice this smell. And I'd been in surgery, so I was familiar with that smell. And when they started the autopsy, I realized that the smell of this body was really no different than that. The thought went through my mind that the smell of this dead body is not much different than the smell of a live one. And the moment I had that thought, my brain went, oh my God, that's a perfect first line for a book. So the whole series for Addie Winston was kind of born out of that one thought. And I tried to write the series when I was living in Richmond, Virginia, and it just wasn't quite gelling for me. The setting wasn't right. The humor wasn't right. And then finally, I moved to Wisconsin in 1999. And when I moved to Wisconsin, I live in a small town politics and small town humor, and experienced some Wisconsin quirkiness. And I went back to this book again, and all of a sudden things started working, and the story came together. So the whole Addie Winston series was kind of born out of that one thought and that one incident, and then didn't really come together fully until I actually moved to Wisconsin. Originally, it was going to be set in Virginia, but it just didn't work. So that's how it came to be here. I have 12 books in the Addie Winston series right now. I had 3 books in the 90s that were published by another publisher, and they were more thrillers rather than mysteries, and they had kind of a paranormal element to them. And so when I wrote the Addie Winston series, it was a completely different type of book and type of story. And it was also a number of years in between the third book that I did that was HarperCollins I was with back then. There were several years between when I wrote that book and when the first Addie Winston book came out. So the new publisher that I was with wanted me to publish it under a new name so that they could pitch it as a newly discovered author. And they didn't want to have the sales of the new series hampered if they looked back at my old books that I'd had come out under my real name, because the last book that I had was sort of orphaned by the publisher. It's a long story, but it was back when in the late 90s, all the publishers in New York were doing a lot of shifting and buying and selling. And I think it went from, I don't know, 10 or 12 publishers down to like 5 or 6, because they all merged and bought up other entities. And HarperCollins actually bought up Avon Books. And in the process, they ended up dropping most of their own paperback original authors for some reason. So when my book came out, it was orphaned, and they knew that I wasn't going to be with them any longer. So they didn't do much to promote it. And the third book didn't sell very well. So that's why I ended up with this pseudonym for Annelise Ryan. And when I was with Kensington Books, book number, I don't know, 4 or 5 or so that I was writing, my editor that I was with there said, I've always had this idea for a book that's kind of like a Cheers setting in a bar. You could do drink recipes in the back. And do you think you could do a book like that? And could you come up with a proposal for it? And so I thought about it for a little while, and then I wrote up a proposal and threw in a disorder for the main character called synesthesia that I'd actually discovered while researching something for the earlier 3 books with HarperCollins. And it was so fascinating to me at the time that I kind of kept it, in the back of my head, thinking I'm going to get to use this sometime later. And I did. I ended up setting the book in a Milwaukee bar, and I gave this character synesthesia, which is a disorder where your senses kind of get cross-wired. So you may smell something, but when you smell it, you also might experience a sound, or when you hear music, you might also see colors with certain notes, those kind of things. It is a real disorder, and it actually helped my character solve crimes, because she can use her synesthesia to kind of understand, things that have happened, things that have changed and whatnot. So we had 6 books, I think, in that series, and then that series came to an end. It was intended all along to kind of be a limited series, so it was kind of fun writing that and having a nice story closing. It's always a little awkward when you're writing a series with a publisher, because you don't always know when you write the book if you're going to get a contract for another book. So do you need to write this book like it's going to kind of end the series, or do you need to leave it open-ended? And sometimes that can be a little awkward, but with the Allyson K. Abbott books, it was pretty straightforward. So that was nice. They did want me to come up with a new pseudonym, because at the time they weren't sure if the Maddie Winston books were going to take off and do well. And they didn't know if the new series would take off and do well. And they didn't want one to affect the other. So they told me to come up with another name. And by then I was kind of tired of trying to come up with names. And so I got a little bit strategic as far as the name goes, because I've been in bookstores enough to know that when you go into the mystery section, the books that you see first that are at eye level, and right there are the A names in the mystery section. And so I said, all right, I'm going to have a last name that starts with A. So I picked Abbott, AB, pretty good. I knew this from being, Beth Amos on the shelf, although I have to admit it was a little depressing to go into the store, because I'd go in and see one Beth Amos book and then a whole entire shelf of B.C. Andrews, who was dead but still writing books. So that was a little depressing. But anyway, so I came up with Abbott for the last name. And then I decided I was going to get a little cheeky with us and have an inside joke. And so I picked the first name that also started with A, and then threw the middle initial K in there, so that the initials are AKA, also known as. My editor got it right away. He was very tickled by that, thought it was really cute. So that's how Allyson K. Abbott came to be. The Maddie Winston series actually got a 2-book spinoff for one of the characters. For I think her name is Hildy Schneider. The second book came out, I think, last year, and probably won't be another one of those out anytime soon. But it is kind of a fun little series, and she's an interesting character as well. And then I recently just signed a contract with Berkeley Books for another new series, the first book of which I am finishing writing as we speak. It's due to be turned in December 1st. So I'm putting the finishing touches on it now. And the setting for that book will be in Door County, and it's going to feature a main character who owns a book and oddities store. So she owns a bookstore that sells mysteries, but her store also sells odd things like, oh, balls made, think here, there's balls made out of hair that comes from cow stomachs that people collect. And there's hair jewelry that they used to make back in Victorian times, and skulls and all kinds of creepy things that a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people are interested in. So her store is kind of a combination of these two things. And she is a cryptozoologist, which means that she hunts for cryptids, which are creatures that are believed to maybe exist, but no one can prove it. So like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, werewolves, those kind of things. So it's a little bit X-Filey in that regard, but it's also kind of a cozy mystery as well. So, and with the setting in Door County, at least for the first book. The second book will probably have a lot of the setting take place up near the Apostle Islands. So it'll be a little bit further north up in Wisconsin. And let's see, I have the 2 books contracted with Berkeley right now. So that's where that is. I am a nurse by trade. I did retire in February of 2020. That was a planned retirement, although it turned out to be a very good time to retire given COVID. So there's a lot of people who said I did it on purpose, but I swear to God, I had a plan that way for years. And since I've retired, I've continued with my writing, not so much with my nursing on a professional level, but on a personal level. I've had to take care of my son who ended up hospitalized. In fact, my last day of work, I had to call in sick because of my son having to have surgery and have his leg amputated. Long story there, but and then spent weeks and weeks in the hospital with him. And then he had to stay in the hospital because he developed an infection and there were problems. And then COVID hit. And they wouldn't even let us visit him in the hospital. And then he had to come home and have home health and IV nursing and dressing changes and all that. So we got all that taken care of and done with. And then within 2 months of him finally being up and going back to work and getting his prosthetics and stuff, my mother had a stroke and now she has moved here. So I've been kind of caring for her as well. So my retirement from nursing hasn't gone quite the way I thought it might, but still, I'm not working in an ER anymore, which is what I used to do. So, and I used to get a lot of fun story ideas from nursing, not particularly using actual patient experiences, but just kind of making an amalgam out of all the different experiences over the years and stories that other nurses have told me, and the humor. I think the humor that medical people have is very, it's unique and very funny. I think that they're some of the funniest people on the planet, as I was telling Pam before, and that humor has kind of helped me to get through life over the years and to get through the jobs over the years. Sometimes the job can be depressing. Hospice is certainly a job that can be kind of depressing, but the humor doesn't get any darker than it is in hospice, let me tell you. So there's a need, I think, for that humor to keep people going and to help them survive some of the more tragic aspects of the job. And one of the things that the Maddie Winston series that I really wanted to do was have an outlet to share some of that humor and just tell those stories in some form. And I think that's one of the things that's made the Maddie Winston series a success is the humor in it. It's, most people find that it's a very funny series. There have been a few people who have taken offense at some of the humor. I hear about those in the reviews every once in a while, but for the most part, most people enjoy them. So there will always be humor in my books. I'm a excuse my French, but I'm a smart ass. And so I do have kind of a warped sense of humor, and it does come out, and it comes out in my writing, it comes out in my speech, comes out in my day-to-day life. So there will always be some humor in all the books that I write. That's kind of my story, other than the fact that I started writing when I was very, 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 very young. And started with diaries, and then I had 3 sisters who were younger than me, so diaries didn't work too well because they were always reading them and then reporting them to my mother, getting me in trouble. I was the kid in school. We moved around a lot when I was growing up because every time my dad got promoted, it meant to move. He got promoted a lot. He worked for the government, but not the military, but it was kind of like being a military brat. And I was always the new kid in school, and I was never very popular because when the teachers would assign book reports or essays or something, I was like, yes. And all the other kids are like, yeah, get her out of here. So I loved writing in any form, any way, shape, or form, and reading. And that's just something I've been doing. I actually sent my first story that I ever wrote to Highlights magazine when I was 17 years old. And they sent me back a rejection with lightning speed. And that was in the days of snail mail. So, so yeah, that's how my writing career started. And that's pretty much what I got. So anybody have any questions or comments or? Got two Arlenes. Are they both the same person? No? Yes? No?
I'm not sure. If you're more comfortable putting your question in the chat, you can feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
You can ask questions. I also have a dog here who's named after my main character, Addie Winston. So he's ignoring me now.
I had asked Beth earlier before we started, where Sorensen was. That's a city listed in her book. So you can answer that one if you'd like, Beth.
Well, I live in the town of Stoughton, which is about 20 miles southeast of Madison. It's a town with a population of about 12,000 people. And a lot of the shenanigans and politics and humor that happens in Stoughton also happens in the books. In fact, in Stoughton, when we first moved here, there were 3 bars in town because it's a Wisconsin town, so there's bars on almost every corner. But there were 3 bars that were called the Whatever, the I Don't Know, and the Never Mind. Those were the names of the bars. And so if you had a discussion about what bar you were going to, it was like Abbott and Costello, who's on first routine, you know, what bar are we going to? Never mind, I don't know. So I wanted to kind of incorporate that into the books without using the actual names of the bars. And I worked to try to come up with names that would be sort of clever in that same vein, and ended up coming up with, I think, the Somewhere, the Anywhere, and the Nowhere bar. And one of the reviews that I read from somebody actually said, I can't believe this author created bars with the name Anywhere, Somewhere, Nowhere. Who would do anything like that? And it just took every ounce of restraint I had not to write back and say, well, let me tell you. So anyway, a lot of Sorensen is based on Stoughton, but I sort of positioned Sorensen in this Neverland up about north of Madison, a little bit west of the Dells. And I think maybe it might have moved a little bit sometimes in different books, but that's kind of where I positioned it. So it's an imaginary town based on a real town. Very much so based on a real town. People do drive their tractors and park them at the bars here in Sorensen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat. Is it common practice for your editor publisher to change aspects of your book? You mentioned you weren't sure if they were going to keep the title for your new book.
They don't usually, my experience has been they have not changed, my editors have not changed much in the way of my actual stories in the books. They've always changed my titles with the exception of the very first book I ever wrote, which was I titled it Cold White Fury. It's about a boy who experiences these sort of fugue states and has this power to do things. And so the Cold White Fury was, in my mind, just a description of these fugue states that he has. And they actually kept that particular title. I thought sure they'd change it, but they didn't. But every other book that I've written, they have changed the titles of the books. First Maddie Winston book, I had a title for that I thought was just so brilliant. I called it The Vicarious Liver, because it was kind of a take on living vicariously, because that's part of the plot of the book. And the liver was the organ that sort of becomes a valuable clue in solving the crime. And so I thought The Vicarious Liver was just the most brilliant title ever. And I had all these other titles like A Gut Reaction, An Eye for an Eye, and they were all based on body parts and stuff. And they totally trashed those, said they were terrible, and came up with their own titles. So we ended up with The Working Stiff and Frozen Stiff and Scared Stiff. So we had all the stiff titles. And when we ran out of those, they started working on dead titles. So we have Dead in the Water, Dead of Winter, and Dead Even, and Dead Calm. So the actual storylines, they haven't changed. I'm not sure if they're going to change the title of the new book I'm working on. They didn't they didn't make it sound to me like they were going to, but I haven't seen the actual cover art for it yet. So who knows? And they haven't done any advertising. So that's when you really know what they're going to do for the title, is when the advertising comes out. The blurb in Publishers Weekly did use the title that I'm currently working with, but that's the only place that I've seen it. So, and the blurb in Publishers Weekly for the first Maddie Winston book also listed The Vicarious Liver as the title. So I loved that title. I so loved that title.
Well, there's so many that, do a play on words with food or whatever else. So it wouldn't be off base to have a play on words with body parts. So
Oh yeah,
I think very creative, I think. So they're wrong.
I like them. What can I say?
Yeah.
I've had, let me think here. I've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different editors through my career. And the 6th, the last one, I have not actually turned anything into yet. So I don't know how she's going to be to work with. But like I said, the other editors I've had have been great. They have not made a lot of changes to my stories at all. They seem to like what I do and say I turn in clean manuscripts, whatever that means. So that's kind of how that's gone.
Nice.
I know other authors, though, have different experiences.
Does anyone else have any questions that you'd like to either verbalize or type in the chat? I know that Beth she has her new book is coming out next fall. So if things turn around here with COVID, we're hoping to be back in person, and we can have her back in person after her new book comes out. So that would be awesome to do. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I'm not seeing anyone muting. We had a couple more come in here. Yeah, you saw that. But is there anything else you'd like to mention, Beth, before we end for the night?
Yeah, I don't know what people are interested in for the most part. So, I mean, I could babble all night long, but it probably put people to sleep. So.
It's very interesting. It's always interesting to hear the writing journey. Oh, there's a friend. Hi, bud. Oh, what book are you most proud of is a question here in the chat.
Wow, that's a good question and a hard one. I think I'd have to say the one I'm the most proud of is the very first one that I had published, only because I tried and tried and tried for years before that to get published. And so that book, I guess, the Cold White Fury book, is probably the one that I'm the most proud of. But the Maddie Winston series has been a blast to write. I love the characters. I love the storylines. I love the setting. So certainly the Vicarious Liver, which I did self-publish actually before I sold it to Kensington. So there were a few copies of the Vicarious Liver out there.
Neat.
With that title. So I'm pretty proud of that one too.
Awesome.
That's a good question. Hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Proud of all of them, but yeah, I think the first one was kind of like your firstborn, it's always got a special place in your heart.
Yeah, definitely.
You're wet. Why are you wet? Get down.
Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We did have a few come in here, later, so that they were able to hear most of the program. So I will put this up online tomorrow, hopefully. And then just kind of advertise it out that way too, that for those that couldn't attend could listen to it online. So thank you so much.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll connect again next year and hopefully have you here in person.
Sounds great. Thank you to those of you who did come.
Yeah.
I did like doing the Zoom version. At least I don't have to find out where the bathroom is first thing, because I was telling Pam earlier that when I used to do book signings, I learned the hard way to find out where the bathroom was first thing, because somebody will inevitably come up to your table and you think you're going to sell them a book or talk about the book or sign a book, and all they want to know is where's the bathroom. So I've had book signings where that was the only person who came to my table was somebody who wanted to know where the bathroom was. So this version here is kind of nice. I don't have to scope out the bathrooms ahead of time. Prepare that way. So,
Right. So yeah, it'll be
thanks to everybody who came.
Yeah, thanks. And it'll be better when we're in person. These are sometimes a little, I was saying to Beth, just a little awkward, and, just talking over the internet is an odd thing. So, but yeah, we'll connect with you again next year, Beth, and then hope to have an in-person program with you. So thanks so much.
Sounds fantastic.
Good luck on your upcoming book publishing and future book selling for that too. So we'll keep an eye out for that here, and we'll definitely buy that. We have earlier this year, we went on, and whatever we didn't have of Beth's, we tried to purchase. And then we have all of the ones that we can have here. So if you're interested in any of our books, we have them here or through our library system. We have a 30 library system that we can get books through. So thanks so much.
I also do have a Facebook page for Annelise Ryan where I do book giveaways fairly often.
Nice.
So if anybody's interested in that, check out the Annelise Ryan Facebook page and you might get a free book out of the deal.
Cool.
I just finished giving away, I think it was 12 books to people because I had a little contest on there and only 12 people entered it. And I said, what the heck? This is the era of participation trophies. So I'm going to give one to everybody.
Nice. Nice.
So I had to clean my shelves out. My shelves are getting a little crowded back here. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Beth. And we'll talk to you soon.
okay. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.